Hello, my name is Kwame Spearman. I'm with Tattered cover, and I'm going to be speaking with the one and only Clara Villarosa about something that is incredibly near and dear to me, or at least, at the very least, my childhood, the Negro League. And so I was first introduced to the Negro League when I actually went to the Negro League Hall of Fame when I think I was only about 8 or 9 years old. And there were a few things that I picked up. One was some Negro League baseball cards, which essentially the same type of baseball cards that all kids were purchasing when they grew up with their favorite athletes, except these were of Negro League players who played baseball in the 1920s, 1930s, the 1940s. And so it was an opportunity to get to know this baseball league that had people who looked like me, but wasn't currently something that was happening. And so it became this historical journey that I was searching down. And when I got back to Denver, I was obsessed. And one of the things that my parents got for me was a book. The book was called Only the Ball Was White, and it was by Robert Peterson. And it used essentially a scout's view of someone who was watching Negro League players back in the day to show, one, that there was this magical baseball league that was occurring with players who were as good as the players from baseball that we hear about, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, et cetera. That there was a league that featured these types of players, and also the discrimination that prevented them from going into Major League Baseball. I remember an example from Only the Ball Was White, where a scout was watching someone play and they hit a home run. And the scout's like, that would be great, but that person's a tad too dark.
Right.
Look at their hair.
And look at the hair, it's rough. Because before we had words for our hair.
And they were prevented opportunity. And so it was a really fascinating example of just seeing discrimination. Because to me, the way I view discrimination is when you make choices that aren't rational, solely based off someone's race, sex, religion, appearance, etc. And these moves weren't rational, because what we would find as Jackie Robinson, who was a Negro League player, and other Negro League players went into Major League Baseball, they were among the best. And the fact that they were prevented from joining that league for so long only speaks to one thing, which is just pure racism. So for the month of July, for Hue-Man Experience and Tattered cover, we're going to talk a little bit about the Negro League, something that I was, once again, obsessed with growing up. I'm still obsessed with now. From a historical perspective, just so everyone's aware, last year in 2020, Major League Baseball decided to incorporate Negro League players and Negro League records into Major League Baseball. And so from a record perspective, a Hall of Fame perspective, the two leagues have now effectively merged. Some quick background on the Negro Leagues: it was an all-Black baseball league. And much like the Major League Baseball at the time, it was mostly featured in the Central Midwest and the Northeast. Most major cities at the time fielded teams, and those teams would travel to baseball stadiums and play one another, just like Major League Baseball. After integration began, though, and the concurrence of World War II really led to the dissemination of the Negro Leagues. As players started receiving opportunities on Major League Baseball teams, they ran towards those opportunities. Understandable, financially way more advantageous, bigger stadiums, bigger venues. And after Jackie Robinson, it became possible. And so the Negro Leagues essentially ended in the 40s. But with Tattered cover, we're trying to bring that back. For everyone who's not aware, Denver is actually the host of the All-Star Game, the Major League Baseball All-Star Game this July. And so from a Hue-Man perspective, we wanted to talk about the Negro League. Clara, who is here with me, I think you hit an era with age where
Be kind, be kind.
you embrace it. So I'm at an age where I'd love for people to think I was 10 years younger, right? But I think you hit a milestone where you're like, no, I am firmly happy. Been around for as long as. So Claire, you just remind everyone, how old are you?
I'm a nanogenarian, 90.
And so if you do the math, Claire, you were then around when there was a Negro League.
Right.
And so I just wanted to have that conversation with you, and then we can sort of tie that in to some book recommendations for folks who may not have been around during the time of the Negro League and are maybe hearing about it in many ways for the first time. So just a broad perspective, Claire, just describe in your eyes, because you were, I believe, in Chicago at the time, and Chicago did field a Negro League team. What was it like growing up with the Negro League?
Well, I wasn't a baseball fan. As a matter of fact, my father took me to a baseball game. And he was ecstatic, the White Sox and the Cubs. So I went, I sat, and I watched, and I said, is this it? And my father said, what do you mean, is this it? What did you see? I said, well, a man came up and a man threw a ball and another man hit it, and then they all started to run. He said, well, they all didn't start to run. I said, well, okay, one ran, but they hit the ball and that's it. And then another one came up and he did the same thing. And then they changed because they had different uniforms. My father said, really? So I wasn't much of a baseball fan, but I did know about the excitement when it came to, because it was a baseball town. And so the Cubs and Sox, oh yeah, everybody talked about baseball. And it was great. And people weren't aware that it was not colorblind. And I had no idea of the National Leagues, the Black baseball, no.
So you had no idea of Major League Baseball when you were growing up?
I knew Major League Baseball, but I didn't know about the Black leagues.
Ah, okay.
And I didn't learn that much about them, and I'm going to be very honest, until I opened the bookstore. And I wanted to figure out, why did they say on the cover of that book, only the ball was white? And I said, oh, Negro and the other league. And so who I knew about was Satchel Paige, the pitcher. And they talked about his fastball. And they said he couldn't hit it. And I couldn't understand, what do you mean you couldn't hit it? They said it would go so fast. I said, it couldn't, how could he throw it that fast? Because I tried to throw it. And I said, oh, don't white players do that? They said, not as well. But I didn't have as much experience with it, but I was aware of it. And my father wanted to make sure that everybody was talking about the baseball league. So he took me and I looked at it and I said, that's what they do? Now, what I was accustomed to was football. And nobody was hitting anybody and nobody was really running all the time and people weren't chasing you. That was much more fun than somebody standing there. I said, what happens if he hits him? He said, oh, that's not a good thing. I said, because sometimes you can't control it. My father said, well, it doesn't happen that often, Clara.
Well, I mean, Satchel Paige is such a good example, because by the time that he got into Major League Baseball, by the time that there was less segregation in Major League Baseball. Let's just be blunt about it. And they allowed him to play. He was much older in his career, and he still was a force.
Right.
And it's a very good example of the quality of Negro League players. And there are others, you know, everyone remembers Babe Ruth, right?
Yes.
But there was a Negro League player, Josh Gibson,
Gibson.
who, you know, I encourage for anyone who is a baseball enthusiast to go look him up. Many people believe that he would have far surpassed Babe Ruth's 714 homers had he played in Major League Baseball because of the quality that he had. But he unfortunately was in many ways aged out by the time that there was integration in baseball. And so you really, there were fantastic players. And I don't think anyone would disagree with the notion that there were fantastic Negro League players at the time, given everything that's happened with sports. You know, from the books that you were selling, Clara, about the Negro League, what did you hope people took away from those stories and that history?
Well, that we exist all over, and we excel. Now, people generally expect African Americans to excel in sports, but they really weren't expecting it in that particular sport and to do that well. And they often would say that Blacks, when they were playing, that they had a superior aptitude for it. Not really, come on. And I said, no, it's what we do.
And why is the Negro League, in your opinion, I said some of mine before, but why is the Negro League such an important thing in 2021 for us to be talking about?
Well, of course you think about the time and why they had to do the Negro League. It reminds us of a time in our history when we talk about segregation. You also see, and it happened with housing as well, that once it becomes integrated, we lose the specialty of it in terms of ourselves. And so I think about that, and I thought about that in terms of housing. When we became integrated, what we lost in terms of our neighborhoods and what our children would see, because they would see all kinds of people in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Clara, so that I love that point, because there was no bigger prize in the 30s and 40s than baseball, right? It's easy to look at, you know, football now and think that that's America's sport. It was not in the 30s and 40s. It was baseball. It was everything. I mean, far superior. The distance between football and the next league today is small in comparison to baseball in the 30s and 40s. And so what I'm hearing you say, which I just love, is at the same time that you're allowed to participate in this pinnacle of what American life is, the consequence of that is a loss of identity. And you're right. I mean, when you read about the Negro League, and this is why we're encouraging everyone to do it, it was a beautiful league. And the players were actually playing at Yankee Stadium and Ebbets Field. I mean, it was literally, you know, people, I grew up watching A League of Their Own. And the whole point of that movie was, here you had women playing baseball in Major League Baseball stadiums with fans at the same competition level that the men were doing. And that was fascinating enough to have an entire movie. And that happened for one season.
After that,
Negro Leagues are going on for decades, same scenario. And you're right, it was an incredibly beautiful thing. And it sort of deals with this, sort of duality, I think, that Blacks frequently, and quite frankly, most minority groups have to deal with, where assimilation versus maintaining your identity. And this, I mean, honestly, I think this is as good of an example as any, once you understand how beautiful the Negro League was and how successful it was and how great the players were. And it was disintegrated as soon as there was an opportunity to play in baseball. And that story, obviously, I think this is the best sports example. You talked about housing, careers, something we covered last month at Tattered cover was the Tulsa race riot, and the notion that there was a Black Wall Street and there was a successful Black business center.
self-contained.
Self-contained.
We had it all right there.
So so that's one very, to connect it to the future, like my question for you is like, how then are the conversations that books are talking about with the Negro League, how are they so relevant today? Would you say it's this sort of notion of like assimilation versus cultural identity?
I think people still feel as a group somewhat inferior. We don't want to feel that way, what we do. It's deep. And so you take away something that made us like them and even better. And so the spotlight goes off of them, but turns on you.
Oops, sorry.
And turns on you for a different reason, because you are with them and you're working beside them. So you're playing with them. You're not special, isolated, and you could talk about the greatness of the individual players, because they were, and they were greater. And that provides you a sense of pride.
I love it. I love it. So we've talked about Robert Peterson's Only the Ball is White, but I'll tell you, I'm going to say that was my recommendation. I would love to hear some of your other recommendations about the Negro League and why you selected them.
Well, I didn't do that much selecting because I'm not that great. However, I did participate, and wait, I'm trying. My granddaughter pulled all the lists together and combined them, and so I'm trying to find the Negro Leagues.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I'm listening to you. It's funny that, and I think you see this, every 2 or 3 generations, there's a sincere push for a renaissance of things that, were happening 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of that knowledge and information, and it's totally fascinating. But let's go back to you. So what are some of the recommendations?
I'm trying to find them. I have all these papers. Where? Clara Villarosa. Oh, there you go. Well, what I like, it's a story. And I like a story about a person. So I like the ones that sort of featured a player. Mm-hmm. And so when I was looking for the best players and the Negro Leagues and the history. and also individual books about individual players. And also, I was really interested in reading about what their experiences were when they went into the major league. How did, for me, is how did you feel? And the fact that they were having to prove themselves, that they were as good. And then they felt we're not just as good, we're better. And so it gave all of us a sense of pride to kind of show, look, this is something that we do. And it's not football where you beat up people. Because and even basketball. I remember Alex English telling me when he retired, I am tired of running up and down that court and getting beat up every night. And I said, no, you don't get beat up. He said, yes, I do. Look at it. And I thought about it. Push, shoved, beat up. And I said, oh, okay. But it wasn't a contact sport. So it was more cerebral. And so it gave us a sense of competency. See, we can do that too.
I love it. What other books did you recommend?
I was right on time. Sure you were. Shades of Glory. And then one, which was just the history of Negro leagues, and that was by Mark Ribko. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like the feeling. How did you feel? And they felt under a spotlight. We really got to do it now. And you really thought you had to excel. You couldn't be average.
So I agree, and I'm trying to think of there was a movie on HBO. I think it was called Soul of the Game, and I think it was in like the mid-90s, and it was about this notion of everyone knew that there was going to be integration in baseball. And the thought was that you've got these Negro League players, and they're the folks who we were talking about: Satchel Paige, yes, Josh Gibson, Jackie Robinson. And these were, some of the premier Negro League players. And you've got Branch Rickey, who most people know of, who was the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Mm-hmm. And he was the one who ultimately made the decision to bring on Jackie Robinson. There's an incredibly iconic photo of him and Jackie Robinson. He's smoking a cigar, and they're essentially signing Jackie Robinson to play as to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers, first, obviously, Black player in the major leagues. And what was so interesting about the movie is that there were two themes, and both of those themes that you've hit on. Theme number one, they were planning to play major league players. And it would be an opportunity to sort of showcase the fact that they were just as strong, just as good, just as smart, because I think that was the big thing, just as smart as sort of the white players. And secondly, though, there was this microscope where they were trying to prove who would be the best person to integrate in the game. And what I found fascinating about that, and I think you'll get on all of the history that we're recommending with the books, is themes, right? You heard the same things with Rosa Parks, with Lonnie Guinier, right? Where there was this even the Loving court case, where there was this microscope to find the right person to put on this level. And it was for a lot of reasons, right? One was just the basics of racism. There was a presentability element of it.
Mhm.
And, you know, Jackie Robinson was perceived as being more presentable than Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. There was a there was a mental element, and by mental I mean your ability to handle intense pressure, right? And then there was sort of would you let the moment sort of overtake you, as in would you flip out? Because if Rosa Parks had, you know, done this, if Jackie Robinson that first year had gone away, you could have ruined it, not forever, but for a period of time. And it's fascinating to think about those stories and then to parallel them. A lot of people would say similar things about President Obama, right? That he was in that same type of situation as the first Black president, right? And so as you learn the history of the Negro League and what was happening during the Negro League, it's just, to me, it's incredibly fascinating because it's just another example of what life was like, the struggle of integration, and many of the struggles that we still have today that are occurring in society that have to happen if you're a person of color. So I thought that was super, super interesting. And I know we're recommending books, but it was Soul of the Game. Watch it on one of your HBO devices if you can, because it was a super, super, super.
Yeah, by Joe Poston.
Have you seen it, Clara? Soul of the Game?
No, I haven't. But one of the things I wanted to do is to see a video, and I was looking for them.
Love it, love it, love it. So Claire, once again, just because I want to make this as synthesized as possible, let's list those 2 or 3 books that you'd mentioned.
Only the Ball Was White.
Okay.
Yep, that one. And The Complete History of the Negro Leagues, and that's by Mark Ribot. And you mentioned Soul of Baseball, and that's by Joe Poston.
Love it, love it. Listen, Clara, thank you very much. I'm super excited that we are hosting the All-Star Game in Denver. It is
When are they playing?
July 13th.
Oh, it's coming up. Right, good. Coming right.
And it's the first All-Star game since the inclusion of the Negro League. And so not only is Tattered Cover doing everything we can to promote and just educate, quite frankly, I think most of it's just education. I think like so many things, most people were totally unaware that this league even existed.
Right.
But our goal is to educate, and I think Major League Baseball actually is doing a lot to educate people on the Negro League at the All-Star Game. And so I think it's going to be a really wonderful, wonderful opportunity.
And it gives our young people an opportunity to show what happens and how you keep your cool.
And just gives another example of really the strength of prior generations at that time, and how when you sort of think through what you're dealing with today and you compare it to their back in the day, you realize you can hunker down and you can do great things because previous generations did more.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to thank you for giving us your time, as always. Any last story on going to a Negro League baseball game, any interaction with the players, anything that sort of comes to mind?
Not with, well, what I was interested in the team, and I liked the name White of the Sox. And that was sort of interesting for me. But I wasn't particularly interested, but I became interested when they began to integrate. And that's when I became interested in some information. So when I had the bookstore, I made certain that we had sports. And we talked about the baseball leagues. And even at one point, I forgot who, I can't remember, it's been a long time. I brought in a baseball player. I asked him to come. Mhm. And so the kids, so the boys could see, and the girls, oh, whoa, really, he had his uniform on. He said, I have to wear my uniform. I said, yeah, that will really make it very authentic. And he said, okay. Mhm.
I love it. Clara Villarosa, thank you so much